In a blinding flash, a genius changed the world forever. This is the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the brilliant mind who created the atomic bomb, only to find out his own life torn apart by the aftermath.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
After the Manhattan Project and the Trinity explosion and World War II, the federal government started looking for a wide swath of land where they could continue to do atomic testing because the world had changed.
In this video, we're diving into the tragic tale of the 20th century's most controversial scientist. We'll explore the genius, the guilt, and the government conspiracy that turned America's most celebrated physicist into a suspected traitor. Picture this: July 16, 1945, the New Mexico desert. A blinding flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns. The world's first nuclear explosion. A group of the world's brightest minds hold their breath, some sad, some happy. Among them stands J. Robert Oppenheimer, a tall, gaunt man with piercing blue eyes. In that moment, a chilling quote from Hindu scripture flashed through his mind. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But let's rewind. Who was J. Robert Oppenheimer, and how did he become the father of the atomic bomb? Oppenheimer wasn't just a scientist. He was a prodigy. Born in 1904 to wealthy German Jewish immigrants in New York City, Oppenheimer was a man of extraordinary talent. By his early 20s, he had mastered 8 languages, dabbled in poetry, and had a mind that left even other geniuses in awe. But it wasn't just his mind that stood out. It was his obsession with knowledge. He graduated from Harvard in just 3 years despite starting a year late due to illness, then went on to study physics at Cambridge and Göttingen, Europe's premier centers of science. But behind his brilliance, Oppenheimer was haunted by personal struggles. Depression, anxiety, and a clash with authority figures tormented him. Once he even confessed to lacing an apple with chemicals in a fit of frustration aimed at his professor. His ambition and genius were a dangerous mix. By the 1930s, he was a young professor building America's best physics program at Berkeley. His classes were legendary, often veering into philosophy and Sanskrit literature. All of this was building towards something bigger. His intellect, his drive, and his fascination with science pushed him towards the Manhattan Project, the secret US military program that would forever change history. Storm clouds were gathering in Europe. Hitler rose to power, and scientists feared the Nazis could develop a superweapon, the atomic bomb. In 1942, the US government tapped Oppenheimer to lead the top secret Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer pulled together the best minds in physics to create a weapon of unimaginable power. Under his leadership, over 3,000 people worked at the Los Alamos laboratory in New Mexico. The government handed him a blank check. An initial budget of $6,000 exploded to $2 billion by 1945. That's over $30 billion in today's money. But here's the kicker. Oppenheimer had never led a project of this scale before. He was a theoretical physicist, not a manager. Yet somehow, he pulled it off, bringing together the greatest scientific minds of the generation. The stakes were high. The goal? Develop the first atomic bomb before the Nazis could. By July 16, 1945, after years of pressure and sleepless nights, the team succeeded. In the early hours of the morning, the world's first nuclear weapon exploded in the desert. The bomb worked. The atomic age is born. This wasn't just a scientific triumph, it was a turning point for humanity. Oppenheimer had done it. He had created the most powerful weapon ever known. But at that moment, he realized the weight of his actions. Just 3 weeks after the test in New Mexico, on August 6 and 9, 1945, the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Over 200,000 people were killed, and the world was forever changed. Japan surrendered, ending World War II, but at a staggering cost. For Oppenheimer, this victory felt hollow. He was racked with guilt. The man who once sought knowledge for its own sake now questioned the morality of his work. He famously stated, "In some sort of crude sense which no vulgarity, no humor, no overstatement can quite extinguish, the physicists have known sin." Even he meets President Harry Truman in October 1945 to express his guilt, but Truman didn't share Oppenheimer's feelings. And just when Oppenheimer thought things couldn't get worse, they did. After the war, Oppenheimer became a key advisor to the US government on nuclear policy. But as the Cold War began, paranoia spread like wildfire. In 1953, President Eisenhower ordered that Oppenheimer be stripped of his security clearance, suspecting him of being a communist sympathizer. Why? Oppenheimer had once been close to people with communist ties, including his former lover, Jean Tatlock. Though he had never been a communist himself, the association was enough to bring him under suspicion. You see, in the 1930s, Oppenheimer had flirted with left-wing politics. He fell in love with Jean Tatlock, a passionate communist. Jean Tatlock was a med student Oppenheimer met at a communist party hosted by his landlady. American Prometheus describes Tatlock as a free-spirited woman with a hungry, poetic mind. Always the one person in the room, whatever the circumstances, who remained unforgettable. It was this relationship, as much as the Depression and the Spanish Civil War, that pushed him to embrace left-wing social causes. Although Oppenheimer's friends described Tatlock as his true love, their romance was stormy. Robert Serber claimed she disappeared for weeks, months sometimes, and then would taunt him mercilessly. She seemed determined to hurt him, perhaps because she knew Robert loved her so much. Their relationship ended, but it is said that Oppenheimer still saw his lover time and again, even leaving Los Alamos in 1943 to spend the night with her. In the paranoid atmosphere of the 1950s, these old associations became ammunition for Oppenheimer's enemies. He's accused of being a Soviet spy. Oppenheimer's rival, Edward Teller, testifies against him. His once loyal colleagues turned on him, and after 4 grueling weeks, the verdict comes down. Oppenheimer is stripped of his security clearance. The father of the atomic bomb is shut out of the world he helped create. The very government he had served, the nation he had helped win the war, now labeled him as a threat. The scientific community is outraged. Einstein calls it an atomic extermination conspiracy, but the damage is done. Oppenheimer retreats to Princeton, his reputation in tatters. It's not until years later, under President Kennedy, that Oppenheimer begins to be rehabilitated. In 1963, President Lyndon Johnson awarded him the prestigious Fermi Award for his contributions to physics. It was a public acknowledgement of his work and a sign that not everyone had turned against him, a gesture of reconciliation. In his final years, Oppenheimer retreated from the public eye. Years of stress, guilt, and chain smoking catch up with Oppenheimer, and he dies of throat cancer in 1967, at the age of 62. His legacy, sadly, lives on in every conversation about nuclear power and war. Today, as we face renewed nuclear tensions, Oppenheimer's warnings echo louder than ever. The doomsday clock stands at 100 seconds to midnight, closer to global catastrophe than ever before. Oppenheimer once said, "The atomic bomb made the prospect of future war unendurable. It has led us up to those last few steps to the mountain pass, and beyond there is a different country. We're still living in that different country, grappling with the legacy of Oppenheimer's creation. The question is, will we heed his warnings, or are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past?" That question gives us a lot to think about. Don't forget to subscribe for more content that'll make you think and change how you see the world.